everyone. Welcome to the ETH Staker community call number 15. We have who must be our favorite guest, Danny Ryan, with us today. Before we get into it, I'd like to introduce everybody. We actually have a lot of our notable friends here today. But with me today is Patricio Werthalter, who is off camera right now, but he represents the POAP program, the Proof of Attendance Protocol. And everyone who attends today, either on Zoom or on YouTube, will be able to collect a POAP. But we're not going to make it too easy for you, and we'll talk more about that later. We have Buddha. You want to say hello, Buddha?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys.
Nolan is Lamboshi, as you call him. Are we you gonna be Nolan or Lamboshi this year?
We'll see.
Whatever.
Depends on the price.
Yes. And Michael, who you know is Invetica.
Hello.
And our guest today is Danny Ryan. You've done this with us once or twice before?
I was on a call where we got raided by and it got ended very quickly, and I don't know if I was asked back. So
that was one of our very first ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that was the learning call.
Because when Zoom bombing was all the rage because everyone was at home doing nothing.
Yeah, that was Nolan and I refer to that as the call we don't discuss. But yeah, so I'm delighted to have you. Danny is an Ethereum Foundation researcher who focuses on Ethereum 2, and what we recognize him as is kind of the herder of the implementers. He's where the view of research and implementation. Yeah, I lag out. It's what I do. It's kind of my hobby. Danny has the best view of research and implementation, and so he might be one of the people who is most able to answer our questions about how things are unfolding. So welcome to everybody. We have a bunch of questions, and we're going to get rocking and rolling. So I think the most important thing that we want to get out, the Beacon Chain launched December 1st, which is almost 6 weeks ago. What can you tell us about how that process went and how it's going right now?
So it went well. First and foremost, I think it was a resounding success, and that was both due to the astounding work that researchers and engineers have put into this for years and years, and also the community, the hobbyists, institutional players, everyone stepped up, everyone got those nodes running, and we've had a pretty fantastic stability, especially in comparison to some of the test nets that we saw. It really does matter if something's on the line. It seems like people really want to keep their nodes online, keep them running well. And it's been a relatively straightforward task, given that we have relatively robust and stable implementations of the software now. So the past 6 weeks have been somewhat uneventful, which is good. We've seen a number of unfortunate small slashing incidents due to misconfiguration and kind of over optimization of setups. And we've seen, I think client teams have continued to roll out updates focusing on stability, optimization, and some security improvements. So nothing crazy on that front, all very expected. And now we're circling back at the end of the new year and figuring out, we've known where we're going, and now we're heading in that direction. And primarily that is, fulfilling what the Beacon Chain is for. The Beacon Chain, what it is we, the community, bootstrapped a new proof of stake consensus mechanism that is intended to be the more sustainable, more secure, and more scalable home for Ethereum in the long run. And so to do that, we have to ultimately extend the functionality. What the Beacon Chain does today is come to consensus on itself, but in the future, the plan is for it to come to consensus on more interesting things for the community. First and foremost, what we consider Ethereum today, ETH1, slotted into that consensus mechanism, hot swapping the proof of work consensus mechanism for that of the beacon chain. And for scalability gains, some sort of sharding to be able to handle more capacity in some sense with a single consensus mechanism, kind of all unified in the same network. So that was a lot, but if you want to dig into any of that, please.
Yeah, so there's something I want to jump ahead to, because I had mentioned Ben Edgington's article in The Block. Isn't that what we called it? I'm not terribly familiar with it, but anytime Ben writes something, it's generally very high quality. And you just touched on this hot swapping out the engine, the ETH1 engine for the ETH2 engine. And I've created some rumors about testnets that might be implementing this sooner than later. Can you tell us, number one, more of, is that different than what we previously understood would happen? And if it is different, how, and will it happen tomorrow?
So the fate of what we consider Ethereum today, what is often called ETH1, is to live in this new consensus mechanism. That has been the intention for quite a while. I think early in the days it was contested as to exactly what the fate of what we call ETH1 is. But ETH1, ETH2, there's not really like a sequentiality there. It's more like ETH1 will live inside of ETH2, the sustainable home. And so how exactly ETH1 lives inside of that consensus mechanism has evolved, especially over the past 6 months, as there's a pretty active working group that focuses on this merge. This has members of what we would call like the ETH2 side and members of what we call the ETH1 side, because this is ultimately the unification of those two subcomponents of the protocol and the unification of the software that drives the components of that protocol. I'm gonna talk about this in a blog post soon, but in light of a more like roll-up centric roadmap in which kind of ETH1 is this like first-class citizen of state and execution and transactions and scalabilities through a more sharded data environment rather than additional state and execution. It makes sense to elevate ETH1 in this new context to be a first-class citizen and maybe not be this like disjoint shard and instead live adjunct inside of the beacon chain. So like the beacon blocks we know and love today that have all those attestations and things actually have like the user layer payload, which are transactions, which is essentially the contents of ETH1 blocks today. That is what is very actively being worked on and being vetted. I think it's a really beautiful simplification of design. It's funny because it ends up putting us, in early FFG proposals, essentially we were going to bolt on this FFG thing to existing ETH1 blocks. In this path, ultimately, we created this FFG thing in a different context, and now we're going to bolt the ETH1 contents into them. And so it is a nice design. It keeps ETH1 and kind of all the value of Ethereum like very close to the core of consensus. And it's very simplifying in the sense that with some quick and dirty engineering, a couple people were able to like put together like take an ETH2 client, which would drive consensus, take Geth and kind of pull out the proof of work guts and put them together in a way to give what are near like, not production grade in the sense of specs existing, but like production grade in the sense that they reuse an ETH2 client, which is production grade. They reuse an ETH2 client, ETH1 client, which is production grade kind of in this context. So what we do have in this working group is some local test nets that take Teku, which is one of the ETH2 clients, to be the brains of the operation, and take a modified Geth to kind of be the heart, to be that access into the user layer. And we can run local testnets with it today. There's some like refinement and stuff going on that, and also a lot of write-ups so that we can help share our work and bring more people into this this working group. But I don't know when they intend to make like a public version of that, but I imagine there'll be something like a sandbox you can play with relatively soon. So the nice thing about this path in which ETH1 is more closely integrated into the beacon chain is that it's really not it's really not much complexity on top of what the beacon chain is today.
Okay. So I have a couple questions to follow up. Let me ask this one first. Have you observed this this testnet merged client, and did you feel like was it Was it robust enough that it looked similar to what might be used, or was it like a proof of concept?
It's a proof of concept in the sense that like there's not a super concrete spec written down,
Yeah.
but it is robust in the sense that it looks very similar to what very likely will be turned into specs. It's adding a couple of fields to the beacon block, and it's adding a couple of fields to the beacon chain state, and then adding some callbacks to a local ETH1 client saying pretty much like, is this payload, this user layer payload, which is Ethereum transactions, the stuff that we normally use to interact, is it valid with respect to, how Geth or how an ETH1 client sees things? And that all of that is very viable path. And the way that these clients have kind of been conjoined in this proof of concept is representative of, I think, how things might play out. But would I go and run this tomorrow and say this is production grade? No. I mean, first and foremost, we need like lots of consensus tests and all the goodies that we normally want. But is the proof of concept very important in that it, one, demonstrates that utilizing these two pieces of software in this way is very viable, and it, in the event of say an emergency where we need an emergency fork from proof of work to proof of stake, we have I think we could put it together pretty quickly. We don't want to have to put together something like that very quickly, but I think we're in the position where we understand the moving parts and could bang something out.
Cool. You acknowledged that we've sort of flipped the priorities or where the load will be maintained. And, initially it seemed like ETH1 traffic would be a second-class citizen as a shard. And now if that's moved onto the beacon chain, does that make shard data a second-class citizen, or is it?
It doesn't. So shard data, if there's no state and execution on it, so they don't look like ETH1, they look more just like layer one data that can be utilized by the rest of the system. It wouldn't make sense. You couldn't bolt it directly onto the beacon chain because there'd be too much of it. That's kind of the point, right? So in that sense, it's not quite as close to the core consensus, and instead committees kind of check it in, and not everyone has their eye on it at the same time. That's kind of one of the core tenets of sharding. But if they don't have state and execution, there's like massive gains in consensus complexity, both for the construction of the system from an engineering perspective, but also for that of the end user. And so this data can be leveraged for scalability and types of things like rollups and other fun things that scale with layer one data in like a context that is more familiar to existing applications, both from like the ETH1 chain existing in the beacon chain, and also how these rollups, you could have a rollup that threaded across 3 shards for a single threaded, very similar to Ethereum environment. So you could deploy existing applications in massive scale across these things. So not a second-class citizen, but by design, not as tightly coupled into the beacon chain, because you have to do that to get the scalability that you want.
Yeah, interesting. Ross, great, thanks. I'm going to
one more thing. So I think, I don't know if you said it explicitly, but it was a statement of maybe shifting of priorities to merge versus sharding. I would say that a merge is further along than we expected at this time, and might viably be the first thing to do it before sharding. But I think in Q1, a lot of what we'll be doing is writing specs, writing tests, vetting kind of the various paths at play before one is concretely prioritized to bring to production first.
It wouldn't be right to put you on the spot to say this, but is it possible that we might begin rethinking the 2-year commitment to lockup?
So 2-year commitment, that's thrown around. Pretty much it's a commitment until there's liquidity, at which point is likely the merge. If the merge is before sharding, then I think you could see that earlier than 2 years. If the merge is after the building out of sharding, then I think the 2-year mark is more what you'd expect. So definitely there's like a lot of technical considerations in prioritizing this, but there's also community considerations, right? Like if everyone's like, screw this, we don't want proof of work anymore, like let's bring this merge thing, let's like unify the protocol and then extend it, then that's a very valid thing for the community to demand, and maybe precisely what validators will demand. I don't know.
That's when ETH hits 10K and everyone says, "I want my liquidity.
I need out
now." That's right. How do I get out? I didn't know. All right. Somebody else want to badger Danny for a while?
Yeah, sure. So, going along and going forwards, are we going to see the same like big push for public multi-client testnets for the
Yeah,
merge?
absolutely. I think one very important thing is that creating and forking and creating new versions of testnets is not nearly as difficult as it was a year ago, right? Like to get clients just basically playing together was a feat in and of itself. But similar to kind of the ETH1 dev cycle, you'll likely see some like transient short-lived testnets, something akin to like the YOLO stuff where there's not much of a commitment for longer-term maintenance. And then eventually when you are moving towards production, you fork a testnet first, then you fork mainnet. Something that I didn't mention is that in discussions right now is something of like a Beacon Chain like warm-up hard fork in mid-year. This is being discussed on the Specs repo. It's been discussed somewhat in the ETH R&D Discord, and I think over the coming weeks will be discussed more broadly in additional contexts, like on with the staking community and that kind of stuff. Some of this is some cleanups in how state and blocks and things are managed underneath the hood, and some of it might be adding additional small features. For example, adding the notion of a sync committee, which is very similar to the kind of committees we have, but it's a little bit longer lived and serves allows light clients to hook onto the Beacon chain really easily. So like this is a relatively minor feature. It's relatively high value, and it allows us to kind of go through the fork mechanics in mid 2020 before we go through something a little more ambitious like a merge or adding sharding. And so that is also on the roadmap. And before you'd see production grade testnets of merge or sharding, you'd see this kind of stuff, maybe in Q2 as we begin to kind of position ourselves for maybe a summer fork of some of the smaller stuff. And that would require, hopefully we'd see some community engagement on these fork testnets, and certainly community engagement on mainnet, people essentially running an updated version of their software that at a certain epoch, extends and adds and slightly modifies some of the rules for the extended capabilities. So yeah, we will see these cycles of testnets and be engaged with the staking community throughout so that people can kind of test things out and be involved.
I think that kind of leads to the next question, which was like, what can ETHStaker, the community, do to help with phase one? I think when we look back to phase 0, the incentive to participate in the testnets was kind of get phase 0 running on the mainnet and
right.
also the POEBs that we were trying to distribute. But now that everyone has their setup on the mainnet, is there anything that you can think of on how we can incentivize people? Yeah, offer more POEBs.
I mean, so some of this on, we might make a push to do a relatively large testnet to test things out and to test like the fork mechanics out. We also might make a push to make sure everyone has clients updated and all that kind of stuff. I mean, but a lot of the heavy lifting, I think for the next few months is really on R&D and production engineering and kind of getting things to the place where we can put these upgraded clients into your hands. And so until then, I'd say be engaged as much as you want on technical proposals. But from there, like keep mainnet alive while we go and do this other work. And again, on merge and sharding, some of these larger upgrades that we expect to see reach testnets more in later this year. There's probably a lot of other ways to get involved, like especially on the merge. If we have a merge testnet, you can come in and like actually run transactions and like experiment with load and try to push the boundaries on what it's doing.
It's worth pointing out that all 4 of the launch clients have, as far as I know, been hiccup free for the past 6 weeks, which is, I mean, that's a great testament to the work and success they put in there. So I haven't said it out loud, but thank you to the implementers for putting the work into making sure that those work well for us. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that we have 4 robust clients is pretty fantastic. I know the usage is pretty varies across the clients. I'd encourage you to use a minority client, check it out. But even just like to have fail safes in the event that something does go wrong with one of the larger used clients, yeah, there's some pretty awesome stuff there. Big success. Thank you.
I think now that we talked about POAPs, maybe Patricio can introduce the call
yeah.
POAP. We completely forgot about it.
Yeah, but I also wanted to ask, what does Danny think about having a POAP for slashed people? Because we refrain from doing it because we didn't want to incentivize bad behavior.
Oh, that's funny. Oh man.
I actually felt like there are people who have enough ETH that they would burn 3 or 4 ETH just to have that valuable of a POAP. And so I was
that
really
people is
against it.
yourself, right?
Yeah, no, I don't have, not me. I was referring to Patricio Worthalter.
That's what we call a perverse incentive. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to get involved too deeply in POAP governance.
I think that's a green light, Patricio.
It's a pretty funny one.
Yeah, that's an issue because we want POAP to be permissionless for anyone to be issue a token. So far, I'm gatekeeping it, but it's a challenge.
Right.
What I would do if someone does it without my blessing. But I say, I mean, I'm getting the hint that we better don't do it.
Well, and one way to do it, and hopefully they're not listening right now, is to retroactive, do Uniswap style. Don't say you're going to do it, and then like at the end of the year, be like, okay, everyone who got slashed in the first year, you can have it. But no more.
Airdrop for everyone that got slashed.
I mean, I tell you, they are listening because this call has POAP and it's a needs to
I
call, so
know.
they are here.
So that wasn't a commitment. No one told me on that.
We're gonna watch the slasher today and find out that.
Oh my God. I
So
mean, but the Ethereum community loves burned ETH, so.
I've been distributing the POAP for this call using the Zoom chat. If you didn't get it, chime in somewhere, so I send it to you. I'm not doing it as I was doing it on previous call where we wanted it. Now you either have to have your video on or to say something meaningful on the chat or present yourself in a way that you are different from a bot, because some of our popular calls got attacked, and because the POAPs of these calls are going to give you benefits like discount on DevCon or some other things that we are cooking if DevCon happens to happen, we have to be quite strict about civil resistance. So if you didn't get your POAP and you really want it, just message me privately on Zoom or Discord or someone else, and I will deliver. And we have many more questions, so don't waste our time on this.
I don't want to waste too much time, but I may have created a contradiction here because, and I don't know, Michael, have you entered that? Have you begun that process?
I haven't shared the link, so whatever you want to do.
Okay, great. Then no worries. We're
Okay.
fine. If you would like to claim a POAP for this, you will need to join the Zoom. If you're watching on YouTube, the Zoom link is on reddit.com/r/ETHstaker. It is the second pinned post, and you are welcome to hop in and show your face to Patricio.
Yeah, just turn your video on. Everyone that has video, I'm dropping it.
Awesome. And so those were hey Evan, those were the questions that sorry, I was just scrolling through and saw Evan Van Ness, and those are the questions that we had primarily as a community, and we did request submissions, and we have some really good questions. And what we did, the ETHstakers did, was rank those in terms of what we felt were the most important to be asked.
So I want to plug something before we move on.
Please.
And Evan Van Ness made me think about it in one of his comments. There's a huge opportunity. So obviously for the staking community to get involved, like testnets are coming, keep those clients stable and robust. But there are, in terms of like getting involved in a more technical standpoint, obviously like going and helping client developers, like that's huge. Building out tooling, that's huge. But one thing I'd really like to see more of in this year is to expand the scope of like testing and diligence and things like that. If we had 5 teams that showed up with like proposals to stress test networks, do adversarial things, do some additional fuzzing, all that kind of stuff, like these would be no brainers. So like if you know of if you're interested in this kind of stuff, or you know of teams that might be interested in this kind of stuff, please reach out. And we'll probably be putting out like RFPs for that kind of stuff soon. But a great way to get involved is like to battle test and harden this thing, because we need to get it. Although it looks good today, we want to be like of top-notch, utmost assurance that this thing is ready to be our new home before the merge.
Awesome, thank you. All right, community questions. Michael, would you like to get us started with those?
Yeah. So one of the community questions we've got here. I would love to see validator exits to smart contracts made possible, specifically for projects like Rocket Pool to be truly non-custodial. What do you think about the importance of non-custodial staking pools and the steps needed to be taken to make these pools possible?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I agree. I read a proposal that got a little bit of conversation, I think, before the new year, and has been just waiting for probably me to pick it back up. And there's a proposal that allows us to do this relatively straightforwardly today without making any changes to the Beacon chain, and just essentially changing the way withdrawal credentials are. There's a couple of downsides to this that were discussed. The primary being that even though you could have ultimately the custody of these funds be controlled by a smart contract, you can't exit these funds with a smart contract. And this is because ETH1 contracts can't talk to Beacon chain, and we are not in the position to be able to design how that might work today. And so there is still like a layer of trust you'd have to bring into for things like Rocket Pool and stuff. Ultimately, you're assuming this key will exit at some point or will transfer funds if transfers exist. And that's the most major drawback for this. I think that we'll pick up the conversation this week and look to make a decision like relatively soon. The decision, I think there's like pretty high demand. I think I needed to circle around with people like Rocket Pool and stuff and like talk about this particular sticking point and see if it is in their designs. The thing is, you can version these withdrawal credentials and we can create other ones in the futures, but this one would just have that particular drawback. And so that's the blocker, but we need to pick up the conversation again now that we're in the new year. So yes, but to answer the first question, I think this stuff like could be a huge boon to the diversity of the ecosystem. I'm super pro hobbyist staking, but these more like decentralized pooled and institutional players, I think would be really valuable to get on mainnet, especially as like the centralization on staking providers continues to happen and as more stake comes online.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so as we add functionality to the ETH2 chain in the future phases, should stakers plan for additional hardware requirements for either the Beacon or validators?
Right. So the hardware requirements of the merge would be essentially that of today. You would need an ETH1 client and an ETH2 client. If statelessness happens on for the ETH1 chain, which is in the works, I don't know when exactly that would make it to mainnet, then you could potentially reduce those requirements, as like you'd need to be able to process ETH1 stuff, but you wouldn't necessarily need to be able to have the entire state with you, which so you could see a reduction in requirements that over the next couple of years, depending on how that goes. Beyond that, with sharding, the whole point, one of the points of sharding is that you can participate in consensus with consumer machine. That is, you can run the Beacon chain and a small number of shards. Call it 1, 2, 3, maybe 10, depending on what your bandwidth is and distance stuff. But one of the points of sharding is also that the system in aggregate handles more than a consumer machine can handle. And so if you're running a single validator, I should be able to run, which would have the requirements of just a small amount of duties to the shard. I'd be able to run on my laptop, no problem. Probably be able to run 10 of them, no problem. Once I start running 64, 1,000, something like that, I'm gonna need like pretty significant requirements. And this is gonna manifest both in terms of bandwidth and in terms of storage requirements, because there's storage requirements to the shards. And so, yes, things will, in a sharded context, there will be additional requirements on validators. And this is going to come, again, in the form primarily of additional local storage, which you could probably expand on your machine pretty easily, and some additional bandwidth requirements, which for home staking, depending on how many validators you're running, could be difficult. You know, if you're running a hobbyist amount of validators at home, I think you're going to be fine. If you're running 1,000, it might be tough. But if you can get that bandwidth going, then it's probably going to be worth it too. So this is something
the
that probably
hobbyist about 1,000. Isn't
What?
that right? The hobbyist validator is about 1,000 validators, right?
yeah, something like that. So
Andrew,
the whole point is, again, the more validators you're running up to a certain extent is going to scale the amount of requirements you're running. So if you're running like a megaton amount of validators and getting by today, you're going to have to start thinking about what your setup's going to look like in the future. That's also an argument for the merge before sharding, because if you can exit and you can have liquidity on your funds, if the technical requirements came unexpectedly, you could exit and kind of rethink your whole setup. Whereas if we do sharding first, it kind of puts this requirement on validators when they don't really have much choice in whether they continue to operate. So that's another argument there.
Nolan,
One
did
of
you
the
have something?
questions I personally had was like, assuming that sharding is live, and does every validator only choose to be on one shard, or how does it look like? So for instance, if an explorer wants to display all the charts, what kind of syncing type will there be like? And is it going to be like an archive type, or how do I get the data from all shards?
Right. So as a validator specifically, you're constantly like assigned to a shard to be doing work. If you're running 10 validators, you can be assigned to 10 shards to be doing work. Although some of that work is sometimes segmented. So you could potentially not have to take on the entire burden of that entire shard, but maybe more like one slot per epoch of that shard. So that's how the technical requirements happen. In terms of a user being, some casual user that wants to peer into a shard, there should be configuration on your local node. Like, I want to follow shard 1. I want to follow shard 2. I don't want to follow these other ones. In terms of a block explorer, they probably say, I want to follow all of them, which ends up being, if used at max load, pretty high requirements. And then exactly how the APIs evolve and how this stuff is exposed to end users is definitely TBD. One interesting thing in the current sharded roadmap is this is just sharded layer 1 data. There is no canonical interpretation of this data in terms of layer 1s. There's no like transactions in them. There's no, well, you can put whatever you want in them, but the interpretation of it from like a layer 1 block explorer might be nil. But from a layer 2 perspective, some rollup might use all of the shard blocks in shard 1 for like their rollup chain. And so as a block explorer, I might choose to do like a native integration with that and like show it as a first class citizen, like what the actual payload of those blocks are. So there's a lot of like weird design things to think through, especially on the block explorer front. But some of that actually is stuff that I think block explorers are going to have to tackle sooner rather than later, even before sharded data, because a lot of different rollups are coming online, and assets and contracts are beginning to be on different layers. And so I imagine, if I'm not intimately aware of, I imagine block explorers are going to start trying to figure out how to elevate some of these L2 integrations into first class citizens.
Our friend JC asked in the chat, how is the community being polled about the priority between the merge and sharding?
Well, this is one of the first times to talk about it publicly. So it's not being polled right now. So there's two things at play. One is the technical requirements of each. If one were, over the next few months, became abundantly obvious that it was ready to be executed and could be rolled out, I think it would not be much of a conversation, because I think we just want to execute. not wait while the other thing's kind of being solidified. If both are like very much a viable strategy, immediately viable strategy, and specs are ready and things are ready to go, that is it's a harder conversation. I mean, it's a broader conversation, and JC, I don't know, but it's something we're going to have to talk about in the next few weeks, next few months. But I don't know. I mean, I'm beginning to have a bias, and I think I've stated that somewhat clearly here. I'm excited about an early merge, but you know, I think I don't know. Maybe some POAPs. We can do some POAP votes.
Okay.
Yeah, what should be the framing of the question? Because if you ask people, what do they want everything.
Well, right. So if sharded data, here's one way to think about it. If sharded data is to give us, and this is again my bias coming through because I'm framing it for you that way. If sharded data is to give us scalability through rollups, but optimistic rollups that are coming online in the next very soon, already give us 10 to 100x scalability in those contexts, what's another 100 from sharded data in the next like year or so? And so from that standpoint, I'd say let layer 2 max out Ethereum today and at the same time get the merge done, and then extend the layer 2 capability through additional sharding. But how to frame the question? I think, well, for one, I think the question would be better framed once we've done a little bit more technical due diligence. And then from there, yeah, I don't know. It's tough because it's like technical de-risking. It's like encumbering the E2 development process with all of ETH1 stuff. It's like, there's a lot of different pieces. And so it's probably each person's going to have a different set of priorities. But when you're framing that POAP question, you can knock on my door and I'll try to help.
Okay, we'll do that.
So is it the same group of people working on both sharding and the merge, or is it two groups and you can't really prioritize it?
Right now, both of these are more of R&D efforts rather than production engineering efforts, in the sense that we have this merge working group that's been working on R&D for the past 4 or 5 months, maybe probably more, maybe 6 months. And we have this data availability, sharded data availability, and spec writing that's primarily being done by my team, or the team I'm on at the EF. What we're doing right now is working on communication and education with the client teams, who will, in some capacity, be doing some of like the R&D here, and they'll take some of the ideas we have, work on some sample integrations in their clients, and then kind of begin the feedback loop into the spec writing. That on both on merge and sharding likely can happen a little bit in parallel. It's really when, because you can only throw so many resources at an R&D project. It's really when that stuff shifts from R&D and spec writing into production engineering that I don't think you can really like do both fully blown at the same time. Like you then have losses because you're trying to build 2 production versions of different production features. You're trying to ship 2 different test nets. You're trying to do, so at a certain point, in the next handful of months, I think some sort of decision needs to be made so that we can kind of put the pedal to the metal in full-blown production engineering. But right now, yes, things are split, and that's, I think, a good thing. But sooner or later, they won't be able to be fully split.
So is it fair to assume that, and so I've missed the past couple of implementers call, and I'm sure this is answered. Is it fair to assume that the implementers are currently polishing the Beacon Chain clients and not doing new implementation? Is that right?
Yeah, as of now, I think what you've seen since December 1st is a lot of polishing. And only in the past week am I having these kind of like conversations with different engineering teams to, they've been heads down, right? They've been focused very, very much on phase 0 delivery. And so there's a lot of kind of like education initial conversations to get people up to speed to better understand this stuff. And definitely one of the topics of the calls from kind of here forward is the balancing of like keeping production stuff moving and kind of filling in the gaps on spec writing and R&D here.
Well, that really makes sense. I mean, I didn't zoom out on it until just now, but to realize that just like I've been totally focused on the Beacon Chain launch, the implementers have also been solely focused on
Oh yeah.
phase 0, and it's not, they need time to get up to speed on the future just like the rest of us do. So that's something that I didn't
Yeah,
really...
absolutely. And some, I see Terrence sitting right there. He's one of the engineers that kind of constantly has his eyes peeking at different R&D and stuff. But a lot of engineers, for very good reason, have just been like heads down, shipping the shit. So there's definitely over the next few weeks a lot of like information exchange back and forth and bringing people up to speed so we can put the pedal to the metal.
One of the things I have been pushing for in the community is a single click installer for all of the different clients. And I don't really know the right direction to push. I just sort of yellow that out on Twitter every now and again and see what happens. Is that dream of a community sponsored open source single click installer for all 4 clients, is that something that has legs, or am I just dreaming and I should dream elsewhere?
I think that would be a very reasonable product or test. And there's something, I think Geth maintains a product called Puppyth, which helps you like spin up test nets and different clients and different things. And it's a command line tool, but it does try to make the management of different clients in different contexts more generic. And so I think it's pretty achievable. And I think there's high value there. One, to kind of mask some of the complexity to some of the end users, and even make certain things easier, like safely switching client types. By default, when I change from client A to client B, it moves my slashing protection database and things like that. So, I think if the right team were interested, that it could be a pretty fruitful project. It's probably not something that certain users would use. Like I would probably end up just hanging out on the command line because I want to. But I do think that there's likely some value there.
Do you, this is another, like, you haven't prepared for it and you probably haven't thought about it. Would that installer look better as kind of a PPA apt-get, or would it look better as a Docker kind of, which would be the right direction if someone were interested in working on that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe you don't know, and that's okay, because
I don't know. I can't. I don't necessarily. I have trouble assessing that type of user's needs and better understanding what they need. And I think somebody else is better suited to do that. I'm way too deep in the guts of this thing to like. I think
you can't imagine being someone you're not.
No. I mean, I could try, but I think there's probably people much better suited to figure out what that UX need is.
Sure. Yeah.
One of the questions was, what are your goals for ETH2 development in the first half of 21?
Yeah,
I kind of said it earlier, but
we've covered a lot of that. One would be to concretely get this like hard fork 1 moving, all that stuff refined in terms of the specs, to bring both merge and sharding from kind of like iron out the kinks in the R&D process, do some like proof of concept testing in networks and stuff, and bring that into concrete specs, and to position engineering teams to drive really hard on one of those 2 mega features, to deliver production grade test nets of it by the end of 2021, to be able to bring that stuff into reality next year.
I kind of like the next question. Are there any plans to define a common beacon chain API, meaning that one could run a Lighthouse validator with a Prism beacon node? I mean,
so there is a repo called ETH2O APIs. This does define a standard suite of APIs that are first and foremost focused on like kind of information accessors, but they also do have a namespace called /validator that does define the minimum communications between a beacon node and a validator client. I don't know the state of conformance to this API across clients. I think a few are at least like nearly conformant. And so you could, I think Lighthouse and Teku are probably the most conformant right now. So somebody could try running a test between those validator clients and nodes. I don't know if anyone's actively attempting to do that. I see the value there to be able to like quickly swap your validator client with a different node is very appealing. But there's also this like slashing protection database, so you could swap your whole stack for a different node safely. Actually, I remember a lot of validator clients have like the backup beacon node API now, where you can specify multiple beacon nodes in case one goes down. I believe someone tested either taking, I think the Lighthouse validator client and pointing it to both Lighthouse and Teku, and there was a small misconformance in the API. So actually there are a couple, and it was reported. So I think it might be fixed now. So it's feasible and potentially possible today.
That would be an awesome like 3-minute clip to watch. Just like, you know, oh, this is something Proto would do because he has like 8. He doesn't use a screen. What's the alternative to screen that you use? Somebody help me. Anyway, so 8 screen sessions where it shows, you know, running, and then it shows where the beacon chain stops and it kicks over to the other one. That would be, I would heart that on Twitter. So whoever wants to put that up, great.
I mean, the next question I had was, I think, more towards Terrance, and he will probably won't know it, but are there any plans to just support the ETH.NET API instead of continuously managing the Prism API and Lighthouse API?
What was the question? Sorry. Oh, Terrance is there.
Yeah, we definitely have plans to support the API. It's a work in progress right now, and we're aiming to get it out in Q1.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be a huge win.
So we have been through most of the community questions, and I know I'm wildly impressed with the information we have, but I'm sure there's still more that we can learn. Now is a great time to mention that we are offering a POAP for this call, and the way to get that POAP is to show your face on Zoom to Patricio Werthalter, and then he will DM you with a claim code. We are actively working to thwart our farmers because we do intend in the future for these POAPs to have Lamborghini style value. I just threw that word in on accident.
Yeah, so I've sent almost all that's been requested, including like 20 on Discord. If you were participating on our Discord and you reclaim a POAP and you didn't have a camera, you still get it. If you didn't get it because you do look like a bot, like if you never interacted in our Discord, you don't show your camera, your nickname looks like your catwalk on the keyboard, I'm sorry to say, we are gatekeeping this one because we really want to have humans on the call. But I think most of you are getting them. So
Danny, did you get one?
I haven't.
I haven't either. So we must be Sybils.
I delivered both of you because you were on top of the member list because you're hosts. And even if by the time the call finishes, somehow I glitched and you didn't get it, just keep a screenshot that you were on the call and something that proves that you are a human. Like if you have a POAP collection that has a POAP of an event you've been in person, like DEF CON or any other, that's all we need. The only thing we want to prevent is 20 people that have been likely managed from a single location with a command center software. And that's what we are not giving. But we will come out with something in the future. We just don't want to put a very strong CAPTCHA because that would be annoying for most of the other users. And I guess we can go back to questions.
I don't know if ETHStaker has any. I am a little bit ready to open this up to the community, which will need to be a little on guard because I see several people we don't recognize. But yeah, is everyone okay with that?
Let's open mic. Those that don't have cameras, maybe they have microphones and they can stop whining privately to me.
Okay, should be able to unmute.
Let the Texan talk.
We have a Texan.
You
He's
haven't
also a
seen
mate
the-
drinker.
Oh, I see now. Say something, Evan.
Okay.
Well, I am happy to call it a call. Let me think real quick if I have anything else that.
I'm gonna give a quick TLDR.
Yeah.
We bootstrapped Ethereum's new proof of stake consensus. It comes to consensus on itself. People say the beacon chain doesn't do anything. That's precisely the point. It comes to consensus. Before we add the like $100 billion or whatever the hell Ethereum chain into it, we want to kind of vet it in production. So that's what's happening right now. But what do we want to come to consensus on? We want to come to consensus on Ethereum, what we normally call ETH1. We want to come to consensus on things that will help us with scalability, sharded data. That's what we're working on in 2021. If you're a validator and obviously keep your shit running, keep things production stable, and keep your eyes peeled for some of the fun upgrades and test nets throughout the year.
Is it fair that one of the big changes we're looking at is that these things are, which were previously called phases, are now less sequential and more parallel?
Yeah, I probably haven't used the word phase at all on this call. I think that it's, you know, my framing is we have a consensus mechanism. We want to come to consensus on some things. And those major features are emerge and sharding. They are being very actively worked on in parallel, and will be brought to mainnet when they're ready. You know, phase 1, phase 1.5, phase 2, like there's certain like expectations and kind of implied sequentiality with those that don't really hold true. So instead, you know, shifting the framing a little bit.
And then once you have the spec, it'll be more clear whether merge or sharding will come first.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the spec, and it's more kind of R&D, vetting some ideas, running simulations and stuff, and better understanding the complexity of each task.
As you know, not that we start at the price, but the price is going up, and that does tend to bring more interest to Ethereum. And I do believe that it's likely a lot of new technical eyes will view a video like this. And so if someone is rather new to Ethereum and has a developer background and wants to contribute to ETH2 specifically, what would they do to get up to speed and get involved?
Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of getting involved, everything is open source. And I know it's easier said than done sometimes, but contribute early, contribute often. Like fix a typo in a README. You know, when you run into a function call and like a tool you're using and it doesn't work properly, or the documentation's bad, just go in and like file an issue or fix it. And so like getting involved, once you get involved just a little bit, it's infectious. Like you can't stop. And so get involved early, get involved often. And then in terms of getting up to speed, there's more of the kind of like what's going on pieces in terms of blogs. I think Ben Edgington's What's New in ETH2 piece is very good. I try to do some like shorter updates called ETH2 Quick Update. You can check that out. And then more broadly, I would pull down some software, run it, see how it goes. That's a big learning experience. And then there's these like annotated specs, one maintained by Vitalik and one maintained by Ben Edgington, that if you want to do a deeper dive to understand like the actual mechanics of the things going on, those help you bring you up to speed. There's also the ETH R&D Discord. It can be a little bit intimidating probably at first, but just join, lurk, pick a channel that is in a domain that you're interested in, and just kind of see what's going on. Check out the chatter. Eventually you'll have something to contribute and say.
I think you'd also plug eth.research or resear.ch.
Yeah. If you're more on like the kind of theoretical side, ETH Research is a great like kind of longer format forum where people exchange ideas and debate and stuff.
this might be a stretch, but if you were going to suggest a place like a first PR repo, is there something like that's maybe low hanging fruit that could use some?
Sometimes stuff at the edges of the stack. My first PR repo was web3.py many years ago. You know, it's like, it's a wrapper around APIs and stuff. It's not super complicated, but really, if you have a background in networking, then go look at clients, go look at their networking portions of their stack. If you like messing around with JSON and APIs, then check out Lodestar, check out, you know, Web3.py now has a wrapper for the Beacon chain. And if you like getting your hands really dirty, then open up a client and see what's going on. Sometimes teams mark things as good first issue. And, you know, there's, even if ETH2 clients aren't your thing, the stack is huge. There's a lot going on. There's tons of teams, and people are generally like very, very welcoming and receptive to helping hands.
You mentioned Lodestar, and I haven't thought of ChainSafe in a moment. ChainSafe, Lodestar. Are they focusing on a different direction now, or are we still maybe thinking?
The big value from a Lodestar implementation always has been, in my opinion, the JavaScript libraries that come out of it and kind of enhancing the developer tooling. Additionally, being native JavaScript, there might be some like good browser integrations for light clients and that kind of stuff. And they've also, at least early on, when we thought these were a little bit closer, they were doing a lot of like light client R&D. They also, that team helps drive the API standardization process. And so I think that they are following the head of the Beacon chain in kind of an alpha capacity, and might very well forever be in kind of an alpha capacity in terms of running a mainnet client. But all of the things that come out of the creation of that client is a big boon to the developer ecosystem and the browser ecosystem for ETH2. You know, will you ever be running validators on Lodestar? I don't know, maybe. But
Challenge accepted.
but will libraries that are a product of Lodestar's creation be under the hood of something you're using? Almost certainly at some point, especially if you're interacting with browser stuff.
Does it seem to you right now that the 4 launch clients, so at least from my perspective, those 4 seem like they have legs and they will run. Do you anticipate, without, I don't want to put you on the spot, any changes in that number?
It's a good number.
Okay.
These clients are strong. They're all very committed to the next couple of year process. So I don't expect it to go down. I know that Nethermind had like an early ETH2 implementation called Cortex, although they're focusing on a lot of their ETH1 stuff, which that component of the software I think will be intimately important in the stack after a merge. So, you know, they might pick up the Cortex work or not. They might focus more on that user layer. And I've heard rumors of you know, other secret clients, but you know, in the past I think we've probably had 10 ETH2 clients, maybe 11 ETH2 clients in total. And so you might see someone pop up. We'll see.
So that's a metrics clients. Is there any, and maybe Proto might be able to poke on this as well, or some of you people who are deeper in the data, do we have any inkling or evidence that there's a difference in the rewards per client, or is that something that's still nebulous?
In terms of rewards, not necessarily. Likely there are some clients that are more performant than others at the time, depending on the specs you give them. So if client A, you know, which is not the case, is twice as CPU hungry, then you might need to give it more resources to get that profitability. But so ultimately, if you have to have a more expensive machine to run something, then like you could take that out of your margin in terms of profitability. So there are ways to kind of compare, but there's not great comparisons now. I do know that all clients do run at least some validators. And I do know that all of those validators run exceptionally well on the infrastructure that the client teams are providing. And so I know that all clients can perform well. I think one of the hot items right now is that like random 3% drop we see in attestation correctness. It's actually the FFG target correctness that we see if you're watching a block explorer. This has to do with, and I've been talking about this on the ETH R&D, it has to do with a minor fix to the fork choice that needs to go into play, and slowness in either the production or the gossiping of epoch boundary blocks sometimes. Both, so the first will be fixed in kind of a spec fix and modification, which I expect to be rolled out in the next couple of months. And I think we'd greatly see a reduction in that issue. But the latter issue, there is some investigative work to figure out which clients are kind of having this hiccup at the epoch boundary, and where exactly, is it in block reduction or is it in the way that this block's being gossiped? But so whether that be a client, two, or all of them, there's a little bit of like optimization work to do there that might marginally affect profitability.
Awesome. So it sounds like the next time we'd want to check in with you is at this hard fork. That's.
You froze, Superfizz.
I do that every time. That's my trick. It sounds like the next time we'd want to check in with you, I'm going to have to change this box because I've tried everything with it. The next time we want to check in with you is the hard fork that's coming around mid-year. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a reasonable time. I'm always happy to chat. I think definitely over the next couple of months, there'll be a lot of conversation around that as specs are being refined and kind of the features are being selected that go into that.
Is it too optimistic to believe that that either the merge or, yeah, that's 6 months away. I was gonna say it's too optimistic to believe that either the merge or the sharding could kick in at that 6 month, and even I realize that's way too.
No, and one of the reasons that we want to do this fork mid-year is as kind of a warm-up. Nothing crazy is going to be in this fork. A couple of minor features, a couple of minor refinements, and it really is like testing the coordination of getting one of these things out before we do a more major feature. But I do expect to see some movement and fun on both those things this year.
Yeah, great. All right. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add before we wrap it up? So this has been a wildly successful call. I think I saw about 85 participants, it's so awesome to catch up. Like I now feel like everything I've missed for slacking playing Dark Forest over the past month, like I'm ready to get back in the game now. So
Nice.
I really appreciate all of your time, Danny.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How you shield the meme competition and our future activity?
Yeah.
Sure,
Who
what?
did you want to?
Oh,
Food is running a meme competition.
Yeah, right. So in order to get less technical people in the community, we decided to run a meme competition to basically get people from ETH Finance and ETH Trade and all the other communities involved. It's kind of a bait. It worked a little bit. Let's see if we can get more people. Yeah, so if you want to participate, just check out the Reddit. I will pin the thread again. And if you participate, you will also get a POAP and some other rewards that are secret.
so broadly creating memes related to ETH2 staking?
Or ETH1, just
Nice.
Ethereum.
Just memes in general, cool.
I'm very proud of my submission, but I entered my address as the contract address. I might go edit that now because I didn't know there was going to be a POAP. Some other things that we love to talk about. We have ethereumstudymaster.com, which is up and running. Unvetica, or Michael, runs that. That's a great way if you're starting from early on to get into ETH2, read some articles, take some quizzes, and earn a POAP for participating. We also have, what are those groups called? Collaboration groups, yeah. So if you want to go to our new and improved website, ethstaker.cc, you can find a link to our collaboration groups. You can sign up there and you'll be joined up with about 4 other people. You guys will be in a private Discord room where you can get to know each other and support each other and learn together. I'm in love with that collaboration group program. We're going to be scheduling a new game night coming up soon. Michael and I will be talking at ETH Chicago January 14th. That's we've got a lot of exciting events planned for this year. So I'm glad you all joined us, and we'll call it a day. Thanks again, Danny.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy staking, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I think I got most of the POP delivered because I delivered over